Okay, as you can probably tell by this workbench, I'm going to be covering a couple of things in this video, and really talking a lot about foot controls, talking about the basic wiring principle that is pretty consistent across the board with most of these foot controllers, whether it's electronic or whether it's electric. And the basic principle I want to start with, and I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit on my my workbench here. The basic principle with most foot controllers is this, and we'll do a little bit of classwork here. So there, I've got my paper. Most foot controllers are going to be set up with 3 fields, similar to this type of plug-in that you probably have seen this side of on Featherweights, 201s, 401s, 301s. My gosh, pretty much a whole litany of Singer machines have used this type of plug-in point, and people will plug into it, then they'll plug their power in, and they just go off and sew, and then they never think about what these 3 fields represent. So I'll kind of leave this in the background just as a reminder. So what we basically have working to make a sewing machine work is we have 3 fields. The 2 outside fields typically are going to be the power source. So in other words, when you plug a power cord into the wall, one of those leads is going to be connected to this point, the other lead is going to be connected to that point. And then in the middle, on this point right here, you're going to have one of the leads for the foot controller, and you're going to have one of the leads for the motor. And then finally, on this far point over here, the third point, you're going to have another lead for the foot controller. And then on this first lead, you're going to have a line coming off of the motor. So you've got these 3 connectors, just like these 3 points here. Lead 1, you're going to have motor and power. Second lead, you're going to have foot control and motor. And the third connecting point, you're going to have foot control and power. So you notice the power is separated, because if you had the powers connected to the motor, let's say we had motor, the motor would run continuously. Kind of like I'm about to show you a problem with a Kenmore that was wired incorrectly and can be kind of shockingly fixed by just flipping the plug over. So the point is, you're always going to divide the power when you're connecting to something like this, because if you go power on the same line, obviously you're going to have a poof. So again, the way we've divided it out into these 3 zones, just think of it as zone 1, 2, and 3. We've split the power between zone 1 and 3, and on zone 1 we have one of the leads for the motor along with one of the leads for the power. On zone 2 we have one of the leads for the foot control with one of the leads for the motor. And then on zone 3 we have one of the leads for the foot control and one of the leads for the power. And that's what will make it work perfectly, so that when we push down the foot control, it completes the circuit, and then your sewing machine will run. Now, if you also have a light that you have to wire into this matrix as well, the light, as long as that light has a switch so you can turn it on and off, you're going to be wiring the light in conjunction with the power, 1 lead on zone 1 and 1 lead on zone 3. That's the way you would put your light leads, so that your light works consistently. Okay, so that's just the real basics, the science of the basic wiring by the 3 zone principle, which is the way most sewing machines are set up, including this plug-in that you'll see on just a huge variety of Singer sewing machines. So let me move this to the side now that you've kind of gotten your brief little lesson on that, and I'll show you a problem with this Kenmore motor. The way this Kenmore motor was set up, we'll kind of come over here a little bit and kind of go in the middle. I think that'll work pretty well. Yeah, I'll come on a little bit more. Okay, the way this Kenmore motor was set up is it has, let's see, make sure I get all this in the shot here. There we go. I think that's pretty good. So this Kenmore motor was set up basically with the motor, the foot controller, and then it has a plug-in that goes directly into the motor mount. This one right here. So if you're the average sewer and you get a motor and a foot control like this with your machine, you're going to know, okay, there's 3 plug-in points. I remember Scott talking about the 3 zones. So I'm just going to plug this puppy in and mount it to my machine, and we should be good to go, right? Well, maybe not, depending on how they have configured those zones, because as long as you divide the zones out correctly, you could just as easily put a motor wire where there's a foot controller wire and flip them. In other words, as long as you have them divided out properly, there should not usually be a problem. But with this Kenmore motor, what they did is they zoned it out in such a way where if I make the simple assumption of plugging this in such a way that I've done it the wrong way in relation to how they've set their zone up, and I plug it then into a power source over here. See if I can bring this over a little bit more. You can just barely see that power source. And I plug it in, and I've got a Kenmore motor that is running without pushing the foot controller. Simply because the way they zoned it out inside of this part right here is they zoned it out that if you plug this in the wrong manner, you're going to be basically giving full power to that motor, and it's going to be running continuously. And your assumption might be, well, it's a problem with the foot control. But all we have to do on this Kenmore, and probably similars, is we're going to unplug it and we're going to flip it upside down and plug it back in. And now we're going to plug the power in. And we do not have a motor running continuously. But when I push on the foot controller, so you can see how important it is, even when manufacturers, which is, they did this, they set it up like this, Kenmore did, if that consumer doesn't understand the zoning principle of the way the division works between the motor, the foot control, and the power, they're going to plug it in the other way, and their motor's going to be running continuously, and they're going to potentially go into a local sewing shop and say, something's wrong with this. And if that sewing guy or gal has integrity, they're going to say to them, let me try something. And they're going to flip this plug, and then all of a sudden everything is working beautifully. If they don't have integrity, they're going to take it in their back workshop, tell that person, you know what, why don't you go to lunch? Why don't you go pick up the kids? Why don't you go shopping? Come back in about an hour or so. I'll see if I can figure this out. I'm probably going to have to rewire it. And what they'll do while that person is gone is they'll flip that plug and change the way the configuration of those zones are, and then all of a sudden give it back to the customer and say, oh, $75, please. So buyer beware. Sometimes there are real issues, whether it's the foot control, the motor. Sometimes it's a simple way of the way that manufacturer has zoned out the way the power works with the foot control and the motor. All right, let me move this Kenmore out of the way. And the next thing I want to show you is the basic wiring as I've described it to you already. So the basic wiring, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I think that'll be pretty good. So right now, we basically have a foot controller that is a traditional Bakelite. Move it up here a little bit. Which way am I moving? And I have to think backwards there. And we have a power cord. And we have, somewhere in the shot we have it. Maybe I should come out a little bit further. I'm going to be jostling these on the workbench. and drive you crazy and drive me crazy. All right, let's come out a little bit. I was trying to get closer in just so that I could show you things a little bit closer up, but you can make it a big screen on YouTube and you'll be able to see this as well in this Premiere. So I've described the 3 zones to you, right? Right here on this pad of paper. Zone 1, we basically have a split between the motor and the power, and if we have a light, it goes on zone 1 as well. Zone 2, we have a foot controller and we have the motor connection. Zone 3, we have the foot controller, we have the power, and then if we have a light, we're going to put that light on zone 3. So light is zone 3 and 1, and then we have the power source split, and we have the motor and the foot control split. So what does that look like in real life? Okay, I wrote it on a piece of paper, but what that looks like in real life is that if we want to make, right now this foot controller is not going to do anything. Right now this motor is not going to do anything unless I plugged both of these into an electrical outlet to fire it up, but then it's just going to run continuously like that Kenmore. And then I've got a power cord as well. We've got to make all these things work together. So we're going to follow our diagram and see if we can make that happen. So on zone 1, we have the motor and we have the power. We don't have any light. So we're going to take our power cord. Whenever you have a power cord and it's not in use, I would always recommend you put one of these little twist ties on the end just to protect it, so that if inadvertently somehow you end up plugging it in, these two aren't going to be touching or don't have the ability to touch, and there's not going to be a potential fire or just scare your pants off. So I'm going to take this off for now and set this over here. And on zone 1, we're going to connect one of the motor leads and one of the power sources. So I've got my power cord right here. I'm going to take one of these little twist wire nuts, and I'm going to connect one of the motor leads and one of the power sources. Okay, now we're looking at zone 2. In zone 2, we know that we want to connect the foot controller and a motor line, right? So we've got the other motor line right here. I've got one of the foot controller lines right here. I'm going to go ahead and connect 2 of these. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I probably hear some of you saying, Scott, you're too far away. Even when I widen my screen, can you make it a little bit bigger? The answer is yes. And I'll do it right over the top of the foot controller. That way I kind of know the way I've got the camera angled. So what we've done so far is, yep, you can kind of see it. Yeah, right there. What we've done so far is on zone 1, we connected one of the motor leads and we connected the power. That would be this one right here. Okay? So we have a motor lead and we have a power source. Zone 2, we're going to go with a foot controller lead and a motor lead, which we've connected right here. Now we have 2 wires left, and your assumption would be right. We can join those 2 together. That's going to be zone 3, and it's going to be the foot controller and a power source. Okay? So I'm going to join those together as well. So we've just completed our 3 zones. On zone 1, again, we have a lead from the motor and a power source coming together. Zone 2, we have a foot controller and a motor coming together. Zone 3, we have a foot controller and a power lead coming together. So now we have 3 zones, and I'm going to bring my, see, I'll bring that over there. I'm actually going to move that back a little bit because I don't want that too close to the foot controller. And it looks like my motor is off the shot, so give me a second here. Sorry about that. So again, we've got 3 zones that we just wired. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add power to the equation. I'm going to add power to the equation. This is my plug-in right here. I'm going to plug it into this source over here, and hopefully we get a good result. So right now, we're a step ahead of the Kenmore in that we just added power to the equation, and we can test that by 2 different means. This is a real cool little device. You just turn it on, and if it senses voltage, it's going to tell you. It's going to go off like bells and whistles. So I'm going to bring it way over here, turn it on. You get that quick little beep. So we know we have voltage. We can also check it with something like this, because as soon as you plug in a power source, realize that your foot control is charged. And the way you can see that is if I go both sides, you should be able to see in the camera, hopefully, that that is lit up now. So that's telling us, I think you can see that, yeah. It's telling us that we do have electricity running to this foot control. So now all we want to do is see if we push the foot control, is this motor going to fire up? Then we know that we've wired zones 1, 2, and 3 correctly. If we push it and we get a poof, then we know that we wired it incorrectly. Okay, so here we go. Success. All right. So now you know the basics of how electricity works in relation to zones. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our power right away so that we know that we're safe. And then I'm also going to disconnect this foot controller from our wiring matrix over here. Again, our foot controller is connected to zone 2 and 3 right now, so we're going to disconnect it because we're going to do a couple of other things to this foot controller, okay? So I just need to see, there's one of our zones and our other zone. And I'm going to move our motor out of the way, because what I'd like to show you now is something that I've never shown on the channel before, and that is how do we open up a foot controller to expose those carbon discs that are inside of the foot controller that allow you to regulate the electricity flow and basically suppress the electricity flow when you're operating a traditional Bakelite foot controller, okay? And I know that sounds probably a little bit confusing, but it'll make more sense because, you know, think of it as kind of a stop point for that electricity. It's got to go somewhere. And the way the Bakelite controllers are set up, as you depress that foot controller, it's going to allow you to complete that circuit, but the suppression point are the carbon discs that are on either side of the foot controller. And we're going to try to get to those so I can show those to you, because that's going to be also an area that once in a while, I would say probably about, depending on the amount of use you have, about every 5 years, you'll probably want to do this procedure so that you can get in there and clean these little tiny carbon discs that are in there and keep your foot controller running well, running it healthy, and getting into the anatomy of that foot controller so that you don't have issues with it getting overly warm when you're sewing a lot, as a number of people have described. Again, I take issue with Melissa that, you know, it would be shocking to me if a foot controller could get to a point of catching fire. But you know what? Preventive maintenance is always the best answer to preventing anything from happening, no matter what the likelihood may or may not be. Okay? I don't want to go too tight on this. Now these little discs in here, these carbon discs, are wafer thin. They're super, super thin. And all I can say to you is you're going to have to really be patient as you go through this process. You're going to have to really, really take it slow, take it easy. And what we want to do is, once we've simulated going through, because I'm not going to be able to clean all of these discs in this video. There's basically close to 50-some discs on each side. We're looking at nearly 100 of these paper-thin carbon discs, but there is a need to clean them if you're going through this in a real-world sense and trying to keep that foot controller maintain. I'm going to demonstrate on one of them, and also you'll want to note that within the foot controller, on each side there are two unique discs that are going to be thicker, that are going to be inserted first after we've taken all of these out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and flip the foot controller around so that this part is exposed. And I'm going to use my power drill to try to pull that bolt loose so that we can get in there and start looking at these things. So, okay, so that's already come off. And I've got a couple of other little tools with me as well, because some of these parts are just pretty doggone small. So on this side, when we loosen that bolt, our electrical connector that moves back and forth to make that foot controller work came off because it's on the front of that assembly. You can kind of see the front of the assembly, making sure I'm facing it correctly. Yeah, you can see the front of the assembly. It goes right on here, and then there's another piece that it attaches. It's a single assembly that allows the foot controller to work, and then there's a bolt on the other side that retains everything. So I'm going to just lift this out right now. I'm going to try to lift it out right now. Let's go up like this. Don't you love being on camera? You seem so doggone awkward. So now what we have left is we have, I think you can see that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer. Yeah, you can see it now easily. So this right here is basically a retaining nut that's going to hold both sides together and kind of regulate the flow of that. So now we have to get that nut off as well. So I'm going to go back to my drill again, and I'll kind of hold that nut with my finger, and then we're going to use the drill gun to open this up again. There we go. Electric drills are great, aren't they? Alright, so what I'm doing right now, making sure I can turn this around for you, I'm going to take this nut off the rest of the way. And that's off, and it's handy to have some tweezers just so that you can, when these little parts come off, you can grab them more readily. So I'm going to turn this foot controller around again. And right now we've got almost like a little wing thing here. This is going to be something that's going to go in and out, and you'll see once we get this off, well, you'll see it if I lower it down. This is what goes in and out in order to increase or decrease the flow of electricity and allow that electricity to run freely to increase the speed of your sewing machine. So as I take this out, you're going to see that there is kind of a long rod that connects to it and slides into a spring. So I'm going to take that out next, and we'll also want to clean this as well because this is copper, and this is going to be an integral part of completing that circuit. So I'm going to set this over here for right now, and then we'll get back to that. I'm going to take out this spring. You can see that spring right there. That is in there as well. And now we're down to the bare bones. You can see inside of that, well, if I do this, you can see inside of that foot controller that there's a chamber on this side and there's a chamber on that side. And on each of those sides, you've got all of those little carbon discs that we are going to simulate cleaning right now. We're not going to be able to do it in full on this video because, good Lord, it would take us a long time to do that. And I don't think any of you want to sit there for 2 or 3 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen. There's basically 2 little mechanical screws on either side. We're going to open up one of the chambers, and I'll show you what these discs look like. And I'm using a basic regular screwdriver, to do it, you could certainly use a different type of tool that might be even better suited, or you might feel more comfortable working with. So I'm going to stick it into that screw on this side right here, and I'll start to loosen that up. And again, be careful, because you want to keep the angle of this up so that you can control where that screw and where those discs are and end up landing. Yeah, let's see if I've got it out far enough that I can use my magnet now. Not quite. It's a fairly long bolt that goes in there. You can see it now. It's actually a screw. I stand corrected. So there's our screw that we just took out. I'm going to set that over there as well. And now what we have is a small little assembly that mounts on top of those carbon discs. I'm going to kind of take it out slow. We've got a retaining plate. You can see that right there. And then we've got a little metal button right here. Hopefully you can see that. Yep, a little metal button. And it's going to have on one side of it a flat surface that is going to meet up with those discs and complete the circuit when that little butterfly that I took out already goes up and down. So I'm going to set that right over there. Now right here is where it gets interesting, because right inside, let me see if I can turn it correctly here. There we go. So right inside of here you can see the top of those discs. And again, there's close to 50 on each side. And as we go ahead and pour these out, I'm going to pour them out on this white surface so you can see them. The bottom one is going to be noticeably thicker, and when we put them back in, we need to make sure that that thicker one goes on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and just start carefully pouring them out. Where is the camera? There we go. You see why I use something underneath it? They just keep going and going and going and going. And you may not be able to see it in the camera, but I will try to show you that the chamber now is empty. I'll do my best to show you that the chamber is empty. Where is it? Can you kind of see down there? Okay, well anyway, I'm doing the best I can, folks. It's awkward, you know, reversing directions and everything. And you can see, if I zoom in, you can see the carbon dust that, well, you can see it actually from this shot as well. You can see the carbon dust that builds up between those discs and creates challenges as far as me staying on the table here. You can also see the remnants of carbon in there as well, and that would also have to be cleaned. That needs to be cleaned there. But these little guys are extremely thin. I wouldn't even be able to show you with my caliper how thin they are. But again, there's close to 50 of them. Where's my caliper? Just for kicks and giggles here. There we go. So this is one of those discs right here. And if I carefully, because these are real fragile, folks. These are very fragile. And also hard to hold on to, by the way. So, yeah, I think you can see it. There it is, sort of. So if I put it like that, you can see that right now we are at, I mean, barely a millimeter as far as the thickness of these carbon discs. They are pathetically thin, real thin little guys. and very fragile. So what are we going to do to try to clean them? We're going to go back to our good friend rubbing alcohol. And I'm going to demonstrate just on one of these because, again, the time factor, we just don't have time to clean close to 100 of these discs and then reinstall them. And what I want to do, hopefully have time to do, is show you that the foot controller actually works after we're done with this. So a real gentle circular motion. Can you see that? I'm actually off camera, doggone it. A real gentle circular motion with a Q-tip swab, a little bit of rubbing alcohol on both sides of these discs. Now you can see, in support of Melissa now, why some folks that don't like to really work on their machines, they like to use them, they like to have fun with them, but the maintenance aspect of working on the machine is not a pleasure point for them. I know that Bill, Donna, and Jackie, and a variety of others that I've had contact with, doggone it, they like working on their machines as much as they do using them. It's like hand in hand. And you can see we've gotten quite a bit just rubbing that gently. So we would do that times 100 to get all of those discs back to a point where they are nice and clean. Now our challenge now in this cluster of discs is to try to figure out where that thicker one is that we have to put in first, because that's the one we're going to drop into the chamber carefully to get this reassembled again. So I'm going to see if I can find that. Hopefully find it. Somewhere in here. No, that's not it. That's not it. Be nice if they had made it a different color, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be great? If they had made it a different color, that would be super cool. That's a suggestion for Singer if they ever roll these Bakelite foot controllers back out again, is make the thicker one a different color, would you, please? Because I'm having to go through every single one of these, and is it going to be Murphy's Law where it's going to be the last one? Probably. Aha, we got it. Now I'm going to zoom in super close. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it from there. Maybe you can. Maybe you can. But can you see the thickness difference between those two? The one on your left is going to be the one that has to go on the bottom. You can see it's noticeably thicker than the one on the right. All the other discs are going to be exactly the same. So we're going to reinsert the thick one first. This one right here. And we might as well, since we have it out, we'll just swab it a little bit with the Q-tip swab. Again, you could go without putting rubbing alcohol on here as well if you chose to. So then we're going to bring that well up. And I've got to change my shot because this is going to be impossible. And I chose this white buckram style material intentionally. You can just see all the dust, all the carbon dust coming off of these discs just simply by removing them. So, and we haven't even, I would recommend strongly, and I'm going to have to go even a little bit wider because I've got to angle this up obviously to reinsert them. There we go. I think we got a winning shot there. So before reinserting them, what I would recommend, and I'm just going to do it real quick just for demonstration purposes, okay, is take a Q-tip swab, a clean one, with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on it, and just swab that chamber that you're going to be reinserting those discs into. A Q-tip swab will go, that's all the way down right there. So you can kind of see how deep that chamber in fact is to hold all those discs. So I'm swabbing that out. Just going to do some general cleaning real quick just to kind of clean up that area a little bit. You can kind of see what that looks like. See that? I think you can see that. Yeah. So our first thing is, I'm going to put that larger disc in to that chamber. And I use a flashlight just to make sure that it's laying nice and flat. You're not going to necessarily be able to see that in the shot, but just know that that's what you want to do. And then it's just a process, I would say about 2 or 3 at a time. I wouldn't go with more than that. After you've cleaned them, you'll slide those discs back into that chamber. And you might have to jiggle just a little bit to get them to lay down. And sometimes they go in cockeyed too, so. Alright, here's my thick one again, so I'm starting with a thick one all over again. Maybe I should do fewer than 2 or 3, huh? Alright, so that laid down beautifully. Good Lord, I launched that sucker. Just making sure that one is. All right. There, we've got it down to a science now, folks. They're going in like there's no tomorrow. Yay. And if you want to start whistling, because this takes a little while to get those back in. So I just have it on a little bit of an angle. I'm kind of letting them slide down almost like a water slide. The good news is as you get more of a base buildup with these, they're going to slide into place a little bit easier. And you'll notice a couple of them when you take them out are probably going to be a little bit chipped, and that's okay. I don't, you know, with this many in there, and once you've cleaned them, they're going to do the job for you as far